Thank you. Questions, comments, wide open, gray. Yes.
I need
a mic.
No, he's going to repeat all the questions.
Okay.
Sunil, thank you very much for a great and inspiring story.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Shall I just ask a professional question or the business?
Whatever you like.
Personal.
Yeah.
On the personal side, as an immigrant to America, what was the biggest challenge you faced when you came to this beautiful country? Thank you.
So the question is, what was the challenge I faced when I came to this country? Really, there weren't a whole lot. Here's the interesting part. So I grew up in Delhi and Bombay, which are big cities in India. When I came to the US, I spent about 10 days in New York City, in Manhattan, with a friend of mine, felt right at home. Big cities around the world have more in common than, let's say, a big city in India versus a village in India. There's more difference over there than there is between Bombay and New York. So I felt right at home. When I came to Pittsburgh, now this was in the mid-70s, long back, and we were going through the trough of a depression, the steel industry collapsing. That felt like a huge change. Pittsburgh at that time was much smaller, more parochial, etc. And I thought, I'm getting my degree at CMU, and in 2 years, I am gone. And of course, one thing led to another. You make friends, you start your first company, etc., and you stay on over here. But I think for many of us who've grown up in wherever you are in the world, but big city, you go to a decent school, you do your high studies in the US, there isn't too much of an adjustment problem. So the question is, for those of us who don't have to work every day, why do we keep working? Any thoughts, comments?
You love what you do.
We love what you do.
Sense of purpose.
Sense of purpose. That's it.
Commitment to your colleagues.
Commitment to your colleagues, absolutely. All of the above. And there's the other side. If we were to stay home, trust me, after 3 days, our wives would be kicking us out of it. As my wife tells me, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. Okay? Go do something useful. Thoughts, comments? Ravi, what do you think? Ravi is a serial entrepreneur.
My question to you is, I noticed that in the story you told, you kind of didn't mention the biggest success you had, which was, Mastic iGate. Is there a reason for that? Or
No, I figured that's in the bio, right? So why go over that? One of
the follow-up question is that I'm pretty sure there were ups and downs. It's kind of a follow-up on that. So what, when you're really down, and I know there were really bad days in Mastic iGate, what is it that really got you back up?
Like I said, you just keep at it, you just rough it through, but you learn lessons. So from Mastic, which, like I said, didn't survive for 5 years, the lessons that I came away with were, number one, obviously, just keep at it. And here's the interesting statistic, right? Of all the people who start a company for the first time, and that company fails, but then they go out and start a second company, guess what percentage of those second companies succeed when the first one fails? 70%. 70%? Okay, the answer is about 80%. So you start a company, you fail, but you keep at it, you start a second company, you succeed 80+% of the time. Conversely, let's say you start a first company and it's successful. You sell it and you start a second company. Guess what percentage of those are successful?
30%.
20%. It's 20%, right? So the lesson is you learn a whole lot more from failure than you do from success. Now, it's a painful way to learn, okay? It's not just when a company goes under, it's not just that you lose money, your money, and other people's money. It shakes you up. It shakes up your confidence. And Pittsburgh, today it's a little better, but back in the 1970s and 80s, it wasn't that California culture where a failure is wonderful. It's like a badge of honor, and now VCs will give you money. No, there was a stigma to a company shutting down. But you try. So the business lessons I learned from the failure were the following. And over these years now, I've done a lot of investing in startup companies, over 45, 50 startup companies. And the lessons I learned from that first company still stay with me. And they're very simple, which is that when you start, and by the way, the same applies for nonprofits. And at Wish Foundation and at the AI Institute, I'm trying to apply these same very simple principles. That there are just 3 keys to success when you start an organization. I'm getting into business now. Number 1, the value proposition that you have, the product or service that you're looking to sell. How unique is it? And how compelling is it? And you need both. Unique means, are there other competitors out there doing the same thing? How truly unique are you? And secondly, how compelling is what you have to your potential customers? And when I went back, the reason I thought of this was the medical device that I was selling was this disposable device, had a low price per unit, margins weren't that high, and what it was when I looked back on it, that device was certainly unique. No one else had anything like it, but it wasn't that compelling. And if I had done enough research up front, spoken to physicians and said, what do you think of this device? And if they had told me before I raised this money that, yeah, it's nice, but I'm not sure I'll use it, it's just cumbersome. And purchasing agents in hospitals, if I'd spoken with them, they would have said, yeah, it's nice, but don't know if it's worth, I would have thought twice. Could have saved myself 5 years of agony. I could have saved my investors a lot of money. So that's the first big thing. Your value proposition, your product or service, how unique is it and how compelling is it? The second key thing is the operating model that you have. Operating model refers to how you're going to convert your product or service into value. Value for yourself, value for your investors, value for your customers, value for your employees, right? What's your price point of selling? What's the margin that you'll make? What's the cost of getting a customer? What's the total customer lifetime value? How quickly can you get to break even? All that stuff is your operating model. How do you build value? So the key in an operating model, this was my second lesson, is how quickly can your operating model scale and how quickly can you get to self-sustaining level, which is cash break even. And when I look back on that same medical device company, again, we had a product that was unique, wasn't compelling, as I look back on it later, but we also had a crappy operating model. We had a low cost of sales, we had low margins, we had a low cost for the device, we had low margins, but we had a very high cost of sales. These were personal sales. I had to go out, call on doctors, do all this stuff. And if I had known this or thought about this earlier, this would have been the second reason to say, don't do it. Because the operating model wasn't scalable rapidly, and it was going to take a while to get it to sustain. So that was the second big lesson. And the third big lesson is the team, the CEO and the team and the culture. How quickly can that scale? Now, my first company never made it big enough for me to kind of understand this lesson. We never got beyond 6 or 7 employees. But this thing about the team scaling I learned when I started my second company, which I started with a good friend of mine, Ashok Trivedi. And we grew from 0. We went up at peak. We were about 34,000 employees. And what I learned, and what I've learned also in all the startup investing I've done, is, as we know in technology startups, a big chunk fail. They don't survive. 70, 80% don't make it. But even the ones that survive, what's interesting is most of them don't get above around 100 employees in size. Maybe 80, maybe 100, maybe 120. And Pittsburgh is a great example of that. All kinds of startups that were started 20, 30 years ago, some that were started 10 years ago, and even the ones that have done well, most of them haven't gone beyond 100 employees, and that rule is true anywhere in the world. You go to India, you go to China, wherever. And that's where I learned that second lesson, that can the team scale, and really the key person in the team is the founder CEO. Can the founder CEO scale? And having been a founder CEO myself, different times, that's the biggest challenge. All of us entrepreneurs as founder CEOs tend to be very strong type A's, The reason we start companies is because we are control-oriented. We want to be in charge of our own destiny. We don't want someone else, telling us what to do. But that same control orientation and that same detail orientation, that works wonderfully when you've got 10, 20, 30 employees. You look at every word on your website, you look at every proposal that goes out, you have to approve every pricing contract. Everything is controlled by us. Well, that's okay when you've got 20, 30, 40 employees. It doesn't scale when you've got 70, 80, 90, 100 employees. Then you, the founder CEO, start becoming the bottleneck. And it's only when you can step back and truly empower other people that things start changing. Now, empower is a wonderful word, right? All of us will say, obviously, we empower other people. But it means giving up control. And that isn't easy for most of us entrepreneurs. So can the founders, and this was a lesson I learned the hard way with iGate. We got to the 100 employee level. We kind of plateaued out for a while. Then slowly, I figured out, gee, I need to step back. We got to 1,000 employees. Again, we hit a plateau. Again, I figured, step back some more. And that's how we were lucky enough to be able to grow. And now I've learned, and by the way, I've used the same operations in my nonprofits. So when I started Wish Foundation 5 years back, I looked at exactly the same issues. One is our value proposition, trying to improve primary healthcare with innovation. I said, how unique is it? Because just India has 3.5 million nonprofits. I'm guessing out of 3.5 million, at least 500,000 must be in the healthcare space. So if there's 50 or 100 of them doing the same thing, what value do I add by doing the same thing? But I looked, I checked. Didn't seem to be anyone else taking this approach. Then I said, how compelling will this be, if we set this up? And I spoke to people in government, and I spoke to folks at Gates Foundation, et cetera, and they said, yeah, no, it's a pretty neat idea. Then I looked at operating model and said, look, I can put money in, et cetera, but at the end of the day, we're working with government. Can I get government to pay for this? Because that'll give us the ultimate sustainability. And we've worked out a model where, in fact, that happens. And then the final thing was a team that can scale. And there I'm still struggling. My foundation in India, we've got about 550 full-time employees right now. My third CEO just started 3 months ago, because the first two CEOs weren't able to handle that level of growth. And in the nonprofit world, this kind of rapid growth is very unusual. And there's very few people, very few CEOs who can kind of manage through this kind of growth. So, but these are some of the lessons that, again, in terms of building and scaling organizations, like I said, what's the value proposition? Unique, compelling, your operating model, can it scale? Can it get to self-sustaining? And finally, can your team scale? And if all of those look good, now you've got a very likely winner. So as I look at companies to invest in anything, this is the basic framework that I use. Long answer to a very short question, okay?
Lenore, you had a question, right?
Well,
Yes, Lenore?
first of all, it was very neat that you recognized me, so thank you.
You're welcome.
But I was so moved by your stories, particularly of your grandfather. And one question I had is, do you know your grandfather?
Yes,
Do you know your
yes,
grandfather?
yes.
And while you were telling the story, I was thinking, actually, many of us are probably here because of some luck away. Our
Yes.
parents were immigrants, our grandparents were immigrants, escaping pogroms, escaping Holocaust, and all of that. So many of us are here for very similar reasons. But what occurred to me also was how, the partition of India, how family against family, neighbor against neighbor, what the horror of that. We still see that today. Middle East, families, coming from similar backgrounds. Why is that happening in the world? And what, these changes that you're making, that I'm making, that others are making, does it make a difference? Can we, I was just thinking so much. My husband comes from Venezuela. We're Venezuelans. You see what's happening in our country now, today also. Families fighting against families, too. So we're very in touch with that as well, with people we know not getting medicines and all that. So that's happening in the world today as well, even with our technology. The AI for good that we're doing
You're welcome. Did everyone hear that? Lenore's point was this level of anguish, fighting, whatever in the world seems to be increasing around the world, and including in this country. So does it make any difference really? And many people in this room, as we said, are trying to make a difference. Does it matter? When at a larger level you've got all of these other undercurrents going on that seem to be making things worse. Any thoughts, any comments from anyone on that?
I think it's about the human spirit and having a purpose in life, have a big heart. How can you give back? And the world, unfortunately, has been, for thousands of years, when you study histories, has always had conflicts. I think to Eleanor's point, we're hoping that with people having more education and knowledge, that they become humble and helping and educating and stuff. But there's also the good and the bad. They're always going to be the good and the bad. Personally, my family was from Haifa, Jaffa, which was Palestine, and they were expelled by different Jewish organizations. But that did not let us hate Jewish people. In the country, my grandfather, just like Sunil's story, reached out to a lot of Jewish people, helped them during the conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, in 1948, 1967, etc. And the same with my father, just lessons learned. And I am on the board of an Israeli-Arab organization that tried to keep bridging the gap between the Arabs, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Israelis, and elevating the conversation to humanity, to respect, to love, that we all have a purpose on this earth, that we want to make a difference and do something right. So I think I have hope, but I have concerns also. So I think the struggle will continue. We're on earth, but that's the good and bad struggle will always happen. But we'll do the best we can. That's
Absolutely.
sense.
It's dynamite. And thank you for doing what you're doing.
And we're making a difference, a real difference.
Yes. Yeah. The way I look at making a difference, Lenore, I mean, for any of us, it's not the macro, it's the micro. So the world maybe is a little bit more noisy and unruly now than it was 10 years back, but if you're helping one family, it's making a difference. If you're helping 10 families, it's making a difference, 100 families. So whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, livelihood, that's making a difference. This big stuff that goes on will go on. Here's the good news. In spite of all of these ups and downs, we are making huge progress as a human race. So this number that I gave you of 6 million children under the age of 5 dying every year, it's a horrifying number. Guess what that number was in 1990? 12 million children dying every year. So we've made big progress. 6 million kids a year that otherwise would have died are alive, are growing, hopefully happily. So we're making progress, and we all do what we can to help.
I have an opinion about the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
And I feel that we talk about people who don't have much, we should give them education. But in my opinion, I think people who have should be educated about how much the have-nots do not have. And try
Yes.
to help the have-nots. Even us immigrants and our kids, to try to even educate our kids to go and stay a year or so
Yes.
in countries that don't have much, to make them understand that just because you have what you have now doesn't mean you forget about what you don't have. And I think that education, if it rises, the difference between the good and the evil might come closer as time goes on.
I absolutely agree. Did everyone hear that? The haves, if you look at the haves and the have-nots, one of the key issues is that the haves need to be better educated on how little the have-nots have, and hence the kind of assistance that's needed. And you know what's sad to me is that when you look at giving around the world, personal giving, the US gives more than any other country in the world. What saddens me is when you go to countries like India, where we have 100 billionaires and that we're very proud about, and thousands of millionaires, etc., relatively few of those guys actually does anything to help people who don't have that money. And we've all been to parties and these big things in India, tons of money is spent on XYZ. You can see poverty 100 yards away. You don't have to go anywhere. And this is true in most of the developing world. Yet most of these folks, don't try and help. But I think slowly it'll come. If you look at the US 100 years ago, giving levels over here were also very, very low. And they've gone up over time. In India, it is going up. It's going up slowly, but it is going up. Yeah.
Sunil, this is my first time coming to the TiE event. I want to express my appreciation to your speech and meet all of the people. And
Thank you.
I will definitely join the member.
Oh,
Great. Wonderful. Wonderful.
My question, so you mentioned that less is more. So sometimes I strongly agree with the point. Sometimes less is more. But my question is that when we do investment, so we know diversification. Either when we do investment on the either secondary market or we do like you doing VC right now, you invest in a company. So sometimes we have to do more because it for diversification is only free lunch we can have. So it will reduce your risk and also give you more returns. So for example, if think about that, you have two buttons. For example, if you press button 1, your money will double, and if you press button 2, your money will be half. But if you do that in sequence, you will either up or down up. You will get back to what you have. But
Yes.
if you do things in parallel, you will get like 25%. So my question is that how do you balance, less is more or focus like more investments?
Yeah, that's a great question. Did everyone hear that?
No, could you repeat it, please?
By the way, I'm giving you my money to manage. You've got this figured out pretty well. So the question was, I made this comment about less is more, right? To achieve more, you should do less. And the comment, a very good one, was if you take the financial world as an example, less is not necessarily more. So diversification is one of the key principles of good investing. So rather than putting all your money into one stock, which is highly risky, you put it into a variety of stocks. Now, of course, as entrepreneurs, we do put everything into one stock, right, which is the company that we start. But here's my response. Even in finance, so in life generally, I'm a big believer less is more. You have a concrete set of things you want to focus on, and typically to me that shouldn't be more than 4 or 5, whether it's your personal life, your professional life, and that way then you get results in those areas. The 80-20 rule. 20% of the stuff that you do generates 80% of the results. I kind of have the same feeling in finance also. So diversification, I 200% agree, is really important, but how much diversification is good? So there are active managers, active fund managers in the financial world who will manage funds with hundreds of stocks. So a lot of diversification. Does it get you any additional value over managing 30 stocks? Very little. Lots of research shows that about 30 or 40 stocks gives you the kind of diversification you need. But then above that, you don't get the benefits of more diversification, but you're just spending more money on overhead, on admin, on tracking all of this stuff. Even in my, so again, diversification is good, but up to a point. 30, 40 stocks is better than 100 or 2,000 stocks. I'll give you another example. There's an institution in town, I won't mention the name. I was on the investment committee, and they manage about $2 billion, right? They had about 100 funds, active managers that they were overseeing. So each manager had this little piece of money. One of the first things we came up with was, let's compress this down. Just tracking all of these 100 managers was a waste of time. The returns weren't necessarily any better. We've gotten it down to like 30 managers right now. Each of them treats us with more respect because each of them has more money. It's easier for us to track, and our returns are better. So again, I don't disagree with the point about diversification. Totally agree, but again, up to a point, and that can get, yeah.
So this is the last question.
You notice they've put, I don't know why they put 2 mics on me, and I suspect one is a mic and one is a taser gun, right? So if I go on too long or get off topic, zap, I'll be off.
So Sunil, given the challenge of you having to reflect over this many years, what process did you use to distill it down to the talk you gave today?
It wasn't any, you think about this stuff, right? As you go along. And by the way, I travel to India every couple of months, so I'm on these long flights a lot. I love these long flights because it gives time to think, it gives time to read, etc. So over time, some of this stuff crystallizes. And it so happens that I have 2 kids, both of them are now in their late 20s. So I've been starting to put down over the last 3 or 4 years some of my thoughts just for them. So some of this kind of emerged from that. I'd been doing this kind of thinking. I've been speaking with my daughter and my son about some of this stuff. But I was so glad when you called because it forced me to crystallize a lot of this extra quick. So thank you for that. And I hope it's been useful. Thank you.